Welcome to Global Glimpses, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The European Union's new tariffs on Chinese goods are the result of years of growing economic and strategic anxiety. For a long time, Europe and China enjoyed a mutually beneficial relationship, with China providing affordable goods and Europe offering advanced technology and investment. But as the global landscape shifted, so did the dynamics between these two economic giants. European leaders began to worry that their industries were becoming too dependent on Chinese imports, and that this reliance could threaten their own economic stability and security. Once seen as a key partner, China is now viewed as a rival, accused of unfair trade practices and heavy state subsidies that undercut European industries. European manufacturers, especially in sectors like steel, solar panels, and electric vehicles, have struggled to compete with the flood of cheaper Chinese products. This has led to factory closures, job losses, and growing frustration among workers and business owners across the continent. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed Europe's dependence on Chinese supply chains, sparking calls for greater strategic autonomy. When critical goods like medical equipment and electronics became scarce, it became clear just how vulnerable Europe was to disruptions in global trade. This wake-up call pushed policymakers to rethink their approach and prioritize resilience over convenience. The EU's tariffs target green technology and high-tech sectors, areas where Europe wants to lead globally. By focusing on these industries, the EU hopes to foster innovation at home and reduce its reliance on foreign competitors. European leaders see the transition to clean energy and advanced manufacturing as essential for both economic growth and environmental sustainability. By taxing Chinese electric vehicles and renewable energy components, Brussels aims to protect its own green industries from being overwhelmed. The hope is that these measures will give European companies a fair chance to compete, invest in research, and create high-quality jobs for the future. This move is both economic defense and a signal of a broader strategic realignment. It's not just about trade, it's about Europe asserting its place in a rapidly changing world, where economic power and security are increasingly intertwined. European leaders know a trade war with China would be costly, especially for countries like Germany, but pressure to act has become overwhelming. The challenge is to defend European interests without sparking a full-blown conflict that could hurt both sides. The tariffs are a calculated risk, balancing the need to protect jobs and industries with the dangers of escalating tensions. Policymakers must weigh the immediate benefits of shielding local businesses against the long-term risks of retaliation and higher costs for consumers. The era of prioritizing cheap imports is ending. Europe is now focused on safeguarding its economic sovereignty. This shift marks a new chapter in the continent's approach to globalization, one that puts resilience and self-reliance at the forefront. The decision marks a turning point, showing that security and industrial strength now outweigh the pursuit of low prices. Europe is signaling that it's willing to pay more if it means protecting its industries, workers, and long-term prosperity. The EU is betting that these measures will give its companies the breathing room to compete and innovate. By investing in homegrown talent and technology, Europe hopes to build a more sustainable and competitive economy for the next generation. Whether this gamble pays off will shape Europe's economic future, determining not just its prosperity, but its place in the world for years to come. The EU's tougher stance on China can't be separated from US pressure. The Trump administration demanded Europe impose steep tariffs on Chinese and Indian goods, tying cooperation on Russia sanctions to compliance. European leaders, caught between economic self-interest and security alliances, faced a stark choice. Publicly, they insisted on independence. Privately, frustration and anxiety ran high. Fearing economic chaos, the EU rejected the most extreme US demands, but adopted targeted tariffs as a compromise. This move was a nod to Washington, showing willingness to get tough on China without risking economic collapse. The episode revealed just how much American policy can shape European decisions, even when it hurts Europe's own interests. The EU's balancing act highlights the limits of its autonomy in a world of great power rivalry. The EU's tariffs immediately disrupted trade with China, sending shockwaves through global supply chains and upending long-standing business relationships almost overnight. Suddenly, Chinese goods became more expensive and far less competitive in European markets, with price hikes visible on everything from smartphones to household appliances. High-tech and green industries were hit hardest, as these sectors had come to rely on affordable Chinese imports to drive innovation and keep costs down. Chinese electric vehicles and solar panels, once prized for their low prices and cutting-edge technology, quickly lost their price edge, making them less attractive to European buyers. European consumers felt the impact directly, facing higher prices at the checkout and fewer choices on store shelves. Importers scrambled to find alternative suppliers, but replacing established Chinese partners proved challenging and often led to delays and increased costs. The tariffs forced European manufacturers to rethink their entire supply chains, introducing new layers of complexity and uncertainty, and sometimes halting production altogether. Some companies considered reshoring production to Europe, but this process was both expensive and slow, requiring major investments in new facilities and technology. For China, losing access to the vast European market was a major setback, threatening a key export pillar and leaving factories idle as orders dried up. Beijing condemned the move and threatened retaliation, but its options were limited, as it risked further escalation and economic pain at home. The tariffs signaled a new era of fragmented global trade, with both sides forced to adapt to a more uncertain and competitive environment. The once smooth flow of goods between Europe and China now faces persistent barriers, with delays and red tape becoming the new normal. The fallout is reshaping industries and alliances on both continents, forcing businesses and governments to rethink their strategies for a rapidly changing world. As Chinese goods became pricier, Russia seized the chance to fill some gaps in the European market. Russian producers, desperate for revenue amid sanctions and low oil prices, offered raw materials and basic goods at competitive rates. European industries, squeezed by tariffs and rising costs, sometimes turned to Russian suppliers despite ongoing sanctions. This created a paradox. Efforts to punish China inadvertently gave Russia a new economic lifeline. The shift exposed the unpredictable consequences of trade policy in a complex global system. Europe's attempt to reduce dependency on China led to new, if limited, reliance on Russia. The law of unintended consequences is alive and well in global trade. The EU's internal divisions have deepened under the strain of US pressure, the China trade dispute, and the war in Ukraine. The biggest rift centers on Russian energy. Hungary and Slovakia still import Russian oil protected by exemptions that anger other member states. Ending these exemptions is politically explosive as both countries hold veto power over EU sanctions. The latest sanctions package was a compromise banning Russian LNG and targeting firms helping Russia evade sanctions but leaving oil exemptions untouched. This balancing act frustrates hawkish members and highlights the EU's struggle to act decisively. The debate reflects deeper disagreements over how to balance economic interests with collective security. The result, a union often forced to settle for the lowest common denominator. The EU's ongoing tariff war with China, combined with sweeping sanctions on Russia, is having real and often painful consequences for European businesses and workers. These measures, designed to protect European industries and exert pressure on geopolitical rivals, are now being felt in everyday life across the continent. Companies that rely on Chinese components for their products are now facing sharply higher costs. Many are forced to either absorb these expenses, which eats into already thin profit margins, or pass them on to consumers, making their goods less competitive both at home and abroad. This ripple effect is being felt in everything from electronics to household goods. Sectors like electric vehicles and solar power, which depend heavily on affordable imports, are hit especially hard. Tariffs have driven up prices, pushing many potential buyers out of the market and slowing the transition to greener technologies. For many families, the dream of owning an electric car or installing solar panels is slipping further out of reach. Meanwhile, the Russian oil price cap, intended to limit Moscow's revenue, faces major challenges. Lax enforcement and the rise of shadow shipping networks have allowed Russian oil to keep flowing, undermining the policy's effectiveness and complicating global energy markets. Policymakers are caught in a difficult balancing act. Stricter enforcement of sanctions could risk direct confrontation or disrupt vital energy supplies, while too many exemptions allow money to continue flowing to Russia. blunting the intended impact of these measures. Every decision carries significant economic costs, higher prices for consumers, lost business opportunities, or the uncomfortable reality of continued funding for adversaries. Small businesses in particular are struggling to stay afloat amid rising costs and shrinking demand. The economic fallout is messy, unpredictable, and often at odds with the political goals set in Brussels and other European capitals. The disconnect between policy intentions and real-world outcomes is growing more apparent. European leaders now find themselves forced to weigh national security and long-term strategic interests against the immediate need for affordability and economic stability. Every policy decision is a trade-off, with real consequences for millions. The stakes are high for both industry and ordinary citizens. Factory workers worry about layoffs, families stretch their budgets further, and business owners face an uncertain future. Ultimately, the ground-level impact of these economic policies is shaping the political debate across the continent, fueling public frustration, and forcing leaders to confront the complex realities of a rapidly changing world. For ordinary Europeans, the result of these policies is clear. Life is getting more expensive. Tariffs and trade disruptions drive up prices on everything from cars to groceries. Businesses pass higher costs to consumers, eroding household budgets. Inflation, already a problem, is made worse by these new measures. Central banks may keep interest rates high, making loans and mortgages costlier. The squeeze on families fuels social and political unrest, with protests and support for populist parties on the rise. Leaders in Brussels know public support is fragile. The success of their strategy may depend less on diplomacy and more on whether people can still afford a decent life. Economic pain at home could quickly unravel the EU's tough new stance. The EU faces a series of tough choices in a world of rising tensions and economic pain. One path is to double down on protectionism and decoupling from China and Russia, prioritizing security over short-term costs. Another is to seek de-escalation and pragmatic engagement, especially with China, to stabilize trade and lower prices. Most likely, Europe will muddle through with a mix of tariffs, dialogue, and creative workarounds. External events, US elections, the war in Ukraine, China's economy, will shape Europe's options. A major crisis could force unity or push the EU to relax its stance. The challenge is to protect European interests without deepening internal divisions. The road ahead is uncertain and fraught with risk. On October 15, 2025, the EU stands at a pivotal crossroads. Tariffs on China, driven by both internal and external pressures, have triggered inflation, strained trade, and opened doors for Russia. Internal divisions over Russian energy and sanctions undermine the EU's unity and global influence. For Europeans, these policies mean higher costs and growing discontent. The EU must find a strategy that balances security, industry, and affordability, or risk losing public support. The choices made now will define Europe's future and its role in a turbulent world. The stakes could not be higher.